I used to think the dangerous moment was when Maya first stepped into my life. I was wrong. The dangerous part came later, when her being there stopped feeling unusual. By then I had stopped noticing how often I made room for her. On Thursday evening, she was sitting on my kitchen counter as if the apartment lease included her name in very small print. "You know there are chairs," I said, slicing a bell pepper. "I have seen them." Maya reached behind her for the blue ceramic mug she had somehow claimed as hers. "They lack character. They are chairs. Character would be concerning." She smiled into the mug. A month earlier I would have noticed every liberty she took. Now she knew which cabinet held the glasses, which drawer contained the bottle opener, and exactly how low I preferred the music while cooking. More troubling, I knew she hated mushrooms, took her coffee with too much cream, and always chose that ridiculous blue mug, although I owned 6 perfectly respectable white ones. Maya reached for my phone beside the cutting board and changed the song. "Absolutely not," I said. "You liked this one yesterday." "I tolerated it." "You hummed it." I stopped chopping. "That accusation requires evidence." "I heard you through the wall." There was a time when those words would have irritated me. Instead, I looked at her and laughed. Maya laughed too, and something in the apartment seemed to settle around the sound. That was becoming the problem. I had spent years making this place precisely mine. Everything had a purpose. Everything had a place. Solitude itself had a place. Yet Maya had entered without moving anything important, and somehow the rooms had rearranged themselves around her anyway. "By the way," she said, lifting the mug, "I noticed something. That sentence rarely improves my evening. You did not ask whether I was coming over tonight." I kept my attention on the cutting board. "You were already standing at my door holding groceries." Still, I could hear the smile in her voice. "After last week, I thought you might finally admit you wait for me." "I was waiting for dinner." "Of course. Dinner is dependable. Unlike your troublesome neighbor." I glanced at her. "You have become moderately less troublesome. That might be the nicest thing you have ever said to me." She hopped down from the counter and moved beside me to reach for the olive oil. Her shoulder brushed mine, barely a touch, ordinary enough that neither of us should have noticed. I did. For one strange second, my attention narrowed to the warmth left on my sleeve. Then Maya stepped away, completely unaware that anything had happened. I told myself it was nothing. Friendship, familiarity, proximity, all perfectly reasonable words. The question I had not yet learned to ask was why I suddenly needed so many reasonable words whenever Maya stood too close. The moment passed so quickly that I could have pretended it had not happened, and for the rest of dinner I tried. Maya carried the plates to the small dining table while I poured wine, and within minutes we were arguing about whether a movie made before she was born could reasonably be called old. 1992 is not ancient history, I said. I did not say ancient. Your face did. My face is 32. It has limited historical perspective. I gave her a look. That explains a great deal. She laughed and reached across the table for the pepper grinder at exactly the same moment I did. Our fingers met around the glass. Neither of us moved immediately. It could not have lasted more than a second, perhaps 2, but Maya looked up, and suddenly I became absurdly aware of how close her hand was to mine. Her expression changed almost imperceptibly. The teasing softened. The room seemed quieter, although the playlist continued behind us. Then Maya released the grinder. "You win," she said. "Naturally." My voice sounded perfectly normal, which I considered an achievement. Maya smiled. "You are very competitive for someone pretending not to care." "I care deeply about Pepper. That rescued us." She laughed, and I returned to my dinner as though my pulse had not briefly forgotten its responsibilities. Later, we carried our glasses to the sofa. Maya sat beside me and showed me photographs from a neighborhood restaurant she wanted to try. She leaned closer so I could see her phone, one shoulder against mine. I caught the faint clean scent of her shampoo, and immediately became interested in the restaurant menu with the concentration of a woman reviewing mortgage documents. "That pasta looks good," I said. "Claire, that is a photograph of the dessert." I adjusted my glasses. "I was testing you." "Of course you were." She turned toward me, amused, and a loose strand of hair had caught against the collar of her sweater. Without thinking, I reached over and lifted it free. My fingers barely touched the fabric near her shoulder. Maya stopped smiling for half a heartbeat. So did I. We were suddenly close enough that I could see the tiny crease beside her eye. The one that appeared only when she was trying not to laugh. My hand dropped immediately. Your hair was caught, I said. Thank you. Her voice was softer than before. I stood and collected our empty glasses despite the fact that neither needed collecting. More wine. I am fine. Good. I carried them into the kitchen anyway. Behind me, Maya changed the song, granting both of us an easy escape from whatever had just happened. I told myself that was all it was. Two people becoming comfortable enough to stop guarding every inch of space between them. Yet while I rinsed glasses that were already clean, I found myself wondering when comfort had started making me this nervous. 2 days later, Maya convinced me to leave the safety of my kitchen for a small neighborhood cafe where one of her friends was performing an acoustic set. I almost declined, mostly because Maya described the place as casual, a word that has concealed more uncomfortable chairs than any other in the English language. She was waiting downstairs in a dark green coat, smiling before I had even reached her. You came. You sound surprised. I prepared myself emotionally for a text about an unexpected commitment. I considered inventing one. I know. Inside, the cafe was warm and crowded, filled with people talking over soft guitar music and carrying drinks in mismatched glasses. Maya seemed instantly at ease. She greeted people, remembered names, touched shoulders as she passed, and moved through the room with the effortless confidence of someone who had never needed silence to feel safe. I watched her from our table and experienced an unfamiliar sensation. I was seeing Maya in a world that did not include me at its center. It should have been reassuring. Instead, it made me notice things I had conveniently ignored. Most of the people around her appeared closer to her age than mine. Someone mentioned a concert from 10 years earlier as though it belonged to childhood. Maya laughed about an old college story, and I found myself doing arithmetic I had no business doing. 24 years. I had always known the number. That evening I felt it. Maya returned carrying 2 drinks. Why do you look like you are calculating taxes? I was observing. That sounds ominous. She sat across from me. What did you discover? That you know an exhausting number of people. 6. I know 6 people. Precisely. Exhausting. She smiled but studied me for a moment. You okay? Perfectly. I took a sip. Maya did not press. That was one of the things about her I had begun to depend on without admitting it. She noticed doors without insisting they open. Later, walking home, she told me about a song playing from a passing car. You probably remember when that came out. I glanced at her. Careful. Maya stopped. That sounded wrong. A little. I meant you actually experienced it. I only discovered it later. A diplomatic recovery. She slipped her hands into her coat pockets. For what it is worth, I like hearing what you remember. You notice different things than I do. There was no reassurance in her tone, no attempt to make 24 years disappear. She simply treated the difference as another fact about us, like my preference for dry wine or her criminal treatment of kitchen counters as furniture. Somehow that made it harder to dismiss. At our apartment doors, Maya smiled. Thanks for coming into my century tonight. I visit occasionally. She laughed and went inside. I remained in the hallway for one unnecessary second, looking at her closed door. The age difference had not changed during the evening. What had changed was that, for the first time, I wondered why the number mattered enough to frighten me. For the next few days, I treated the number 24 as if it were an interesting fact I had discovered rather than something that had followed me home. Maya made that strategy difficult by behaving exactly as she always did. On Saturday afternoon she appeared at my door holding a paper bag from the bakery downstairs. Peace offering, she said. For what? Nothing yet. I am planning ahead. I let her in. She put 2 pastries on plates while I made coffee, then took her blue mug from the cabinet without asking. Watching her do it should have felt ordinary. It did feel ordinary. That was becoming increasingly inconvenient. We spent an hour discussing books, work, and whether Maya's inability to arrive anywhere without carrying food represented generosity or poor planning. Then her phone lit up on the table. She glanced at it and smiled. Not the broad smile she gave me when she was teasing, but a smaller, private one. I looked away before I could wonder why I had noticed the difference. Apparently I have plans tonight, she said. Apparently. A woman from work has been trying to get me out for drinks with some people from the office. I finally said yes. Something tightened inside me, quick and unreasonable. How adventurous. Maya studied me. That sounded almost judgmental. I am deeply opposed to socializing after 6. I have noticed. She laughed and returned to her coffee. I asked no questions because there were none I had any right to ask. Who was the woman? Was it only coworkers? Had she been the person who sent the message? Each question appeared fully formed and was immediately rejected as none of my business. Maya finished her coffee and stood. I should go figure out what people wear outside after dark. Clothing remains customary. Thank you, Claire. Your guidance is invaluable. At the door she turned. Movie tomorrow? Probably. That is practically enthusiasm. Then she was gone. I returned to the kitchen and discovered her mug beside the sink. The apartment was suddenly quiet. Not peaceful. Quiet. There was a difference, although I disliked admitting it. I washed both cups, wiped an already clean counter, opened my book, read the same paragraph 3 times, and finally poured a glass of wine. At 8:15, music started faintly through the wall from someone else's apartment. For one ridiculous second I thought it was Maya returning. It was not. I told myself my irritation came from disrupted routine. Maya and I had developed habits. Habits were comforting. When interrupted, they left an empty space. There was nothing mysterious about that. Yet sometime after 9 I caught myself wondering whether she was still out, whether she was laughing that private little laugh, and who might be making her laugh. I closed my book harder than necessary. Friendship, I reminded myself, did not grant ownership. The unsettling part was that no one had suggested it did. The feeling had arrived entirely on its own. The next evening, Maya arrived precisely 3 minutes after 7 carrying a bottle of wine and absolutely no explanation for the night before. I was relieved by this, which annoyed me almost as much as my curiosity had. You survived civilization, I said when I opened the door. Barely. There were people everywhere. Terrible. Some of them spoke to me. You have my sympathy. She smiled and walked in, and within minutes the apartment recovered its familiar rhythm. Her coat went over the back of the chair. Her blue mug appeared beside the coffee maker even though we were drinking wine. She chose a movie while I brought out the leftover pasta, and neither of us mentioned her coworkers again. I told myself that proved how little I cared. It was an argument weakened considerably by the fact that I had noticed we were not discussing them. Halfway through the movie, Maya shifted closer to show me something on her phone, and her knee rested briefly against mine. I moved neither toward her nor away. That small decision felt strangely significant. Later she laughed at a scene I had predicted 10 minutes earlier, then leaned her head against the back of the sofa and closed her eyes. You are falling asleep, I said. I am resting my opinions. Your opinions are snoring. Slander. 5 minutes later she was asleep. I lowered the television volume. Without Maya talking, the room changed. I could hear the refrigerator humming, the faint traffic 7 floors below, and her slow, even breathing beside me. I should have woken her. Instead, I went to the hall closet and took out the gray throw blanket. For one brief moment as I unfolded it, I remembered another blanket and another quiet room, waking after the snowstorm to discover that Maya had covered me while I slept. I placed the blanket over her carefully. She shifted once but did not wake. There, I whispered, though there was no reason to speak. I should have gone to my chair and opened my book. Instead, I remained beside the sofa. Maya looked different when she was still. No quick smile, no teasing answer waiting behind it, no restless hands reaching for a phone or changing a song. A strand of hair had fallen across her cheek. I looked at it for several seconds. Then I raised my hand. The movement was so instinctive that I did not understand it until my fingers were only inches from her face. I wanted to move the strand away. That was what I told myself first. But my hand stopped because with sudden and terrible clarity, I knew that was not entirely true. The hair did not bother me. Maya was comfortable. Nothing needed fixing. I simply wanted to touch her. I lowered my hand and stepped back as if distance itself could restore the explanation I had been using for months. Friendship, habit, affection, loneliness. Every word was still available to me. For the first time, none of them felt large enough. For several seconds I stood beside the sofa with my hands at my sides, feeling as though I had discovered something in my own apartment that had been there for months without my permission. Maya slept on, entirely innocent of the crisis occurring 6 feet away. That almost made it worse. She had done nothing. She had not moved closer, asked for anything, or crossed a boundary. I was the one who had lifted my hand. I went into the kitchen and poured myself water instead of wine. The blue mug sat near the coffee maker, absurdly familiar among my orderly white cups. I stared at it as if ceramic might offer legal counsel. It did not. When Maya woke 20 minutes later, she blinked at the blanket and smiled. "Did you cover me? You looked cold." "I was not cold." "Then consider it preventative." She pulled the blanket around herself. "That is almost sweet. Do not spread it around." Her smile should have relaxed me. Instead, I noticed how warmly she looked at me, and every ordinary detail from the evening suddenly seemed charged with an interpretation I did not want. Maya sat up. "What happened?" "Nothing. Claire. You fell asleep during a perfectly respectable movie. I am reconsidering your judgment." She watched me for another second, then accepted the escape I had offered. I should go home. I hated how relieved I felt. I hated more how immediately I regretted that relief. At the door, she touched my forearm lightly. "Thank you for the blanket." My attention dropped to her hand before I could stop it. Maya noticed. Her fingers withdrew. Something uncertain crossed her face, gone almost immediately. "Good night," she said. "Good night." After the door closed, I locked it and stood there listening to her footsteps travel the few yards to her apartment. The next morning, Maya sent me a song. Normally, I would have replied with an insult about the title and listened before breakfast. Instead, I waited until noon and wrote, "Thank you." 2 words. Polite enough for a coworker. Maya answered, "You are welcome," and nothing else. That evening, she asked whether I wanted dinner. I stared at the message for nearly 5 minutes before telling her I had work to finish. It was not entirely a lie. I did have work. I simply had no intention of doing it. The following night, I heard her footsteps outside my door, and found myself becoming perfectly still. They paused. For one foolish second, I thought she might knock. She did not. The footsteps continued toward her apartment. I opened my book and discovered that silence, once restored, was not the triumph I expected. Her mug remained untouched in the cabinet. I did not play the playlist. I did not knock on her door. By the 3rd evening, I had reconstructed almost every habit I had before Maya became part of them. Everything was back where it belonged. The apartment had never looked more orderly. It had also never felt so obviously empty. By the 4th day, I had become impressively efficient at avoiding a woman who lived less than 20 feet from me. I left earlier in the morning. I returned later in the evening. When Maya sent me a photograph of a spectacularly burned piece of toast with the message that she had finally mastered cooking, I answered nearly 2 hours later with congratulations on lowering the standard. She replied with a single laughing face. I stared at it longer than I should have. The ridiculous part was that Maya did exactly what a reasonable person should do when someone asked for distance without actually admitting she was asking for distance. She gave it to me. She stopped suggesting dinner. She did not knock. The music through the wall remained low, and sometimes there was no music at all. I had wanted control back, and Maya had returned it so gracefully that I began to resent the silence I had created. On Friday evening, the elevator doors opened as I reached the lobby, and there she was. Maya stepped out wearing her work coat, a canvas bag over one shoulder. "Hi," she said. "Hello." The word sounded formal even to me. Her expression shifted. "Long week." "Very. Mine too." We stood there with the elevator waiting behind her. A week earlier, one of us would have made a joke. Maya might have asked what I was cooking. I might have complained about whatever she was carrying. Instead, I said, "Well, have a good evening." "You too." She moved past me, then stopped. "Claire." I turned. "Are we okay?" There it was. Not accusation. Not drama. Just a question I had made necessary. Of course. Maya studied my face. Okay. She did not believe me. Worse, she did not challenge me. She simply nodded and walked toward the mailboxes. Upstairs, I poured wine and opened a book. The apartment was exactly as I had once preferred it. Quiet, orderly mine. I read 4 pages without understanding one sentence. Eventually, I went to the kitchen. Maya's blue mug was tucked behind the white ones because I had moved it there that morning. I took it out, then immediately felt foolish and put it back. My phone lay silent on the counter. I thought about sending her something harmless. A complaint about the elevator. A photograph of dinner. One of my dry remarks about her music. My thumb hovered over her name, but I locked the screen instead. I had spent years believing boundaries protected what mattered. Yet this did not feel like protection. It felt like punishment, and Maya had done nothing to deserve it. Neither I was beginning to suspect had I. From the other side of the wall came the opening notes of a song from her playlist, one I secretly liked. I stood perfectly still and listened. For the first time, I understood that rebuilding the wall was not returning me to safety. It was only proving that I now knew exactly who I had placed on the other side. That night, I finally turned off the music halfway through the song. Not because I disliked it. That would have been easier. I turned it off because I knew every note, and knowing every note meant remembering Maya standing in my kitchen, arguing that my taste in music had been emotionally frozen sometime around the invention of compact discs. The silence afterward was worse. I sat on the sofa with my book open and began constructing explanations, because explanations were something I trusted. Maya was 32. I was 56. 24 years was not an abstraction when I allowed myself to examine it. She had years ahead of her that might contain choices I had already made, rejected, or simply outgrown. Careers changed. Cities changed. People wanted different things at different stages of life. That was reasonable. Then there was the other fact, the one I kept approaching as if walking around a piece of furniture in the dark. Maya was a woman. I had lived 56 years believing I understood the basic architecture of myself. I did not think there was anything wrong with loving a woman. The frightening part was far more personal than that. I had simply never imagined that woman could be me. So I tried another explanation. Loneliness. Maya had entered a quiet life, filled it with conversation and music, and perhaps I had mistaken companionship for something larger. That theory lasted until I remembered the evening she mentioned going out with friends and the unreasonable little drop in my stomach. Habit, I decided. I dislike changes in routine. A perfectly respectable explanation, except habits did not explain why I had noticed the warmth of Maya's hand against my arm. They did not explain why, when she had fallen asleep on my sofa, I had stood beside her after placing the blanket over her and wanted to move that loose strand of hair away from her face. I closed my eyes. That was the memory I had been avoiding. I had not wanted to wake her. I had not needed to check whether she was comfortable. I had simply wanted to touch her gently, for no practical reason at all. My hand had stopped before reaching her, but the intention remained. That was what frightened me. Not the action. The wanting. The next morning I met Maya outside our doors. She was locking hers, coffee in one hand, her expression tired but composed. "Morning," she said. "Good morning." Again that terrible politeness. Maya slipped her keys into her coat pocket. "You have been very busy lately. Work has been demanding." "Right." She looked at me for a moment. Did I do something? No, my answer came too quickly. Her face softened, which somehow made it worse. "Then are you okay?" "I am fine." Maya nodded slowly. "You keep saying that." The elevator arrived. She stepped inside, then held the door with one hand. For several seconds neither of us moved. "I am not going to push you, Claire," she said quietly. "But I can tell when someone is closing a door." The elevator doors slid together before I found an answer. I stood alone in the hallway, hearing the machinery carry her downward, and understood that I had spent days asking myself what Maya had changed in me. I had been asking the safer question. The real one was finally impossible to avoid. If what I felt for her was no longer only friendship, then what exactly was I so afraid it might become? For several days after that elevator ride, Maya kept her promise. She did not push. Somehow that was harder than if she had. There were no casual knocks, no messages asking whether I had eaten, No familiar laugh arriving through my doorway before the rest of her. Then one evening I heard 3 quiet knocks. I knew them immediately. I opened the door and found Maya standing there in a dark coat, her expression calm but guarded. "Can we talk?" she asked. I stepped aside. She entered, but this time she did not reach for her usual cup. She remained near the doorway while I stood beside the kitchen counter, and the distance between us felt absurdly formal. "Claire, if you need space, I can give you space," she said. "But I need to know whether I did something wrong." "You did not." "Then why does it feel like I am being punished for something?" The question landed quietly. "I am not punishing you. I know you probably do not mean to." Maya looked toward the silent speaker. "But we were fine, and then suddenly you stopped answering, stopped opening the door, stopped being there." I folded my arms, immediately aware that I was doing it. Things became too close. Maya waited. "Too close how?" "We developed habits. You were here constantly. I was at your place. It was becoming." I stopped. "Becoming what?" "Complicated." Maya studied me with that unbearable patience of hers. "Because I am younger?" My silence answered before I could. 24 years is not nothing," I said. "No," Maya replied. "It is not. But you do not get to decide what it means to me without asking me." I looked away. "That is not the only issue." "I know." Her voice softened. "That frightened me more than anger would have. I am not asking you to explain yourself to me tonight. I am asking why you are acting like being close to me suddenly became dangerous." "It is not you." "Then what is it?" I had explanations. My age. Her age. Timing. Friendship. Habit. The life I had understood for 56 years. Every answer sounded reasonable until I looked at her. Maya took one small step toward the door, then stopped. "Exactly what are you afraid of, Claire?" The room became impossibly quiet. And there it was, Maya asleep beneath my blanket, my hand suspended inches from her face. Her cup in my cabinet. Her playlist on my phone. The nights I had waited for her knock. The hollow feeling when she had plans without me. None of it frightened me because Maya had invaded my life. She had never invaded anything. I had opened the door. I had made room. I had wanted her there. Maya waited, but I could not give her the answer. "Not yet." "I do not know how to say it," I whispered. She nodded once. "Then do not say it until you can." She left, and the door closed softly behind her. I stood there listening to her footsteps disappear, finally understanding what I had been running from. For years, I had believed doors protected me from people coming in. That night, for the first time, I understood how terrifying they could be when someone you wanted might walk out. Thank you for listening to our story. If it stayed with you, please subscribe to the channel and share it with someone who might understand what it means to discover a new truth about yourself when you least expect it.